Minister, we have heard from President Bolsonaro already that he remains neutral when it comes to the Ukraine crisis, but we know that this is having global economic ramifications, especially when it comes to inflationary pressures. How does this affect your job?
Well, certainly inflationary pressures from food, from energy. Ukraine is about grains, and Russia is about fertilizers as far as Brazil is concerned. But we are concerned with the world inflation. So it's a much more wide impact in the world economy because we are just beginning to recover from the pandemic. So it's not good for the world at all. And Brazil, at the Security Council of the United Nations, voted twice already, and we will vote again, condemning the invasion of Ukraine. Having said that, we wish in a peaceful way this thing is solved as fast as possible. Because the world is already in synchronized deceleration. Inflation is going up all over the world, and I think this could only aggravate the future of the world economy.
Having said that, Brazil is such a huge commodities exporter, right? So how does that affect your economy broadly, and how synchronized are you to the world economy, actually?
Well, this is a very important angle, which is most people think of Brazil, oh, we are raising rates to attract some money, or maybe if there is a crisis and the price of commodities go up, it's good for Brazil. No. Brazil is out of sync with the global economy. The global economy was already in synchronized deceleration when COVID came. And Brazil is in the other direction. The most important thing that is happening in Brazil is the transition from a state-driven economy to a market-driven economy. We had now, at the moment, 828 billion reais, is about $160 billion. And by the end of the year, we will have $200 billion of investment commitments. These are signed contracts. This is not PowerPoints or plans. Signed contracts of private investments in natural gas, oil, cabotage, electric sector, concession of roads, seaports. So Brazil has two Marshall Plans. In the next 10 years, a Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe was about $100 billion. We have two Marshall Plans to rebuild the Brazilian economy. So we are very confident that Brazil is out of sync with the global economy.
Will all of that spending, not to mention the spending already promised by the administration when it comes to the credit program, social spending as well, not only exacerbate inflation as well? Well,
that's a different track. This is real investment by the private sector for the next 10 years. A different thing is the fiscal and monetary impulse given during the pandemic. We assisted 68 million Brazilians, vulnerable, the most vulnerable citizens. We preserved 1 million jobs, 11 million jobs in the market, in the private market, in the labor market. And we created 12 million jobs since the bottom of the recession in 2020, mid-2020, until now. So, and Brazil is probably the only country. The other one that did it, it's Singapore. It's easier because it's just a big city. But Brazil is probably the only country that pulled out the monetary and fiscal incentives during the pandemic. So inflation in Brazil could be even lower than the U.S. in this year. Let's see what happens.
Okay.
I think Brazil will again surprise on the upside.
But that's the thing, you're so optimistic about the growth outlook in Brazil, and you're giving me all of this information about new private investments as well. Why does Brazil need another credit program now?
No, the credit program we are announced is just a renewal of the money that came back. We are not printing money or expanding credit. We are just not destroying the credit, because it was the first recovery in the Brazilian history that 48% of the credit went to small and average companies. And these people paid. They recovered with the recovery of the economy. with the assistance that we gave to 68 million vulnerables. So the economy bounced back strongly, and we took advantage of this bouncing back to remove the stimulus. So there's no fiscal pressure. When we talk about inflation, Brazil reduced its fiscal deficit from 10% of GDP to 0 in 1 year. So we contracted the fiscal policy during the recovery. So there's no inflationary pressure. You see, inflation in Brazil went from 3 to 10. Inflation in the U.S. from 0 to 7.5. Right. So basically, it's global inflation. When we talk about inflation in Brazil, it's global inflation.
And yet, add to the credit program the fact that President Bolsonaro is also promising more social spending. His rival, former President Lula, is also promising more social spending. What will happen to the spending cap rule?
Now, our social spending is all inside the spending cap. All our expenditures of the private sector and investments, and there's 2 Marshall Plans. It's not public spending. So in our view, inflation will go down from 10%. The target this year is around 5%. We'll reduce inflation. We are, like I told you, probably the only country that removed the monetary and the fiscal stimulus. The Federal Reserve is quite behind the curve. The European Central Bank quite behind the curve. I'm very much concerned about you here. I don't know. Inflation is coming. The Federal Reserve has been sleeping at the wheel. World inflation is coming. The great global arbitrage of cheap labor from Asia is over.
Right.
So I think you should be very concerned about the future here.